Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors presentation on setting up a business in China. You are ready to launch your company in China. You have done your research and know that there is a market potential for your business. You have found the right location to call home, and now it is time to decide on what type of structure will suit your needs to achieve your short and long-term objectives. You have a choice to start more cautiously by testing the market, building networks, hiring local representatives, or in establishing a legal entity with a capital investment in China directly. Before we begin today's presentation, allow me to introduce who we are. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is specialized in inbound investments to China, Hong Kong. We offer companies a one-stop shop approach to their corporate service needs. We offer market entry advisory, ongoing corporate accounting, tax, and human resource services. Our clients are international companies focused on inbound Asia investments, primarily China and Hong Kong. The strategy of our clients is on manufacturing in China, exporting from China, selling to China, or offering a variety of services within China. They range from startup organizations to small, medium-sized companies, all the way up to multinational and publicly listed entities. We recognize that each company has its short and long-term strategy when entering the Chinese market. As an international and multidisciplinary consulting firm, we have instilled a culture and work ethic of personal service to our clients. As such, our mission is to provide quality, tailor-made services and solutions to each company in conjunction with value for money. We speak a variety of European languages and local Chinese dialects to help clients communicate transparently and more easily when entering and operating in the Chinese market. Our strength is that we can be the link between your new team in China, your team in the headquarters, and our own local network of partners that can provide additional added value services that we can't. Setting up a business in China. Just to quickly go through the agenda for today, we'll be focusing on what type of entities suit your needs, specifically comparing representative offices to limited companies. We will look at the key structural and administration points which help you to develop your China company. We will look at how long it takes to register your company, the process involved, and the critical documents needed to be submitted to the Chinese authorities. We will end today's webinar with some tips on setting up your business in China. Let's begin with a representative office. A representative office in China is a non-legal entity. It is dependent upon its parent company from a legal and financial perspective. The purpose of the representative office is to act as a liaison office to a parent company, liaising on all business activities occurring in the Chinese market. It is important to define what liaison means. Make sure that the representative office is operating within its scope of business. What frequently occurs in China is that companies begin their operation by establishing an entity in China, primarily a representative office, to test the market and start their market entry. And quickly, they soon find out that it doesn't provide them the flexibility to broaden their business scope and do more. The key that I want to emphasize here is liaison office, because this is where there's a gray line between what is permitted and what is not permitted in the Chinese market. A liaison office can only communicate, cooperate, and facilitate. Communicate, cooperate, and facilitate working relationships between people, companies, and organizations that are dealing with the Chinese market and abroad. It cannot negotiate deals. Cannot provide physical on-the-ground or overseas services. It cannot trade in any goods domestically or internationally. And this includes samples. And this is where, again, many representatives fall outside of the scope of business. And as a result, in the eyes of various government bodies, they become an operational and revenue-generating entity. Now, the official business scope of a representative office is outlined on this slide. This is the English version. The Chinese version is the official version, which is then shown on your registration certificate. What it states is market research, product display, publicity activities relating to the foreign company's products or services, and liaison activities relating to the sale of products or provision of services, local procurement, or investments by the foreign company. There are 4 key words here: market research, product display, publicity activities, and liaison activities. You've got to make sure that you remain within these categories of activities. The minute that you fall outside of these activities, you're going to start becoming operational, or what the various government bodies perceive as becoming an operational entity, a revenue-generating entity. Now, representative offices in China require certain criteria by the parent company in order to be able to be eligible to establish oneself. I've listed here 4. The parent company, which must be a company, it has to be an entity, a legal entity, cannot be an individual, must have existed for at least 2 years to be eligible to establish the representative office in China. Representative offices cannot hire people legally. In fact, they need to go through a government-authorized employment agency, which is known in China as a labor dispatch agency. The flow is that the representative office signs an agent agreement with the labor dispatch company. The labor dispatch company then signs official employment contracts with each of the local mainland Chinese employees. The entire payroll process is done via the labor dispatch agency, who remits the net salary, handles the social insurance, and declares the individual income taxes. In reality, they are your payroll agent. What is a bit odd, however, is that the employee relationship is not direct. It is via this agency. A representative office is also limited to only employing 4 foreign employees. By 4 foreign employees, this basically means only 4 residence visas will be granted to 4 foreign individuals. There is no investment requirement for representative offices, and for many overseas companies, this is seen as a benefit and an advantage. However, it should not be forgotten that a representative office is a cost center. It is going to be spending money, and it needs to acquire this money, this capital, from somewhere, which basically means that the parent company still needs to fund the representative office in order to be able to operate and maintain itself. These funds can be remitted on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis. It's completely up to the internal policy of the company and obviously to the budget that's being created for that entity. Now let's look at the varieties that exist of limited liability companies. The first is a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, which is probably the most famous entity known in China. If you go on all search engines, you will find terms like WFC, WFC, all spelled in a variety of different ways. A wholly foreign-owned enterprise is a common investment vehicle for foreign investors looking to incorporate a 100% foreign-owned limited liability company. WFC structures are companies that are focused on providing a service to either consumers or companies. In most cases, the company cannot, and in fact this is in 99.9% of the cases, the company cannot manufacture nor trade in goods. They are not granted import and export rights, meaning that there is no trade or manufacturing feasible within the entity. So this means that the majority of companies that fall under a WFC would be considered as consulting companies, management service companies, training companies, recruitment companies, restaurants, etc. The next type of entity is a foreign invested commercial enterprise. Now again, this is a very common investment vehicle for foreign investors looking to incorporate a 100% foreign-owned limited liability company. This type of company has import and export rights, which include everything from wholesale trading, retail, and e-commerce. Manufacturing companies also fall under this category and do not require an intermediary, an agent, to sell goods locally or internationally, and it may import raw materials for their own production directly. The registration process, however, for a manufacturing company may be a little bit more complicated than other forms of FICE or WOFIs, mainly because manufacturing facilities require additional certifications such as an environmental license and potentially other licenses to approve their manufacturing procedures. The activities of a FICE can also include retail, wholesale, and franchising. When establishing a FICE, it is granted both import and export rights, although additional product-specific certificates may be required in order to commence trade. A FICE can also buy and sell products freely in China without using an intermediary such as an agent. It is possible for both manufacturing companies and trading companies to apply for extensions to their business scope. Now, it is important to note that WOFIs and FICEs are two types of limited liability companies whereby they can be owned 100% by foreign investors. But there are also other categories, such as purchasing centers, research and development centers, investment companies, and regional headquarters. These types of entities don't necessarily fall under a WOFI and FICE definition, and hence need to be considered external from that. Domestically owned enterprises are the main investment vehicles for mainland Chinese investors looking to incorporate an entity in mainland China. These entities are 100% Chinese owned. They are limited liability companies as well. Mainland Chinese individuals can invest in all types of businesses. There's no restrictions for them. They do have different application procedures compared to foreign invested enterprises. And the key point here is that the application procedure is shorter than an FIE. Now, why is this important, and why do I highlight this on this slide? Mainly because most foreign companies, when they enter the Chinese market, they say they should have been here a year ago. They should have been here 2 years ago. They should have been here 3 years ago. And now finally they've negotiated a deal that is about to come into fruition, and they need an entity in order to be able to process it. The issue, of course, is that for a foreign invested company, it takes between 3 to 6 months to establish the company. And when these companies realize this length of time, they're looking for a loophole. And the loophole that they choose is to utilize either a brand new Chinese employee or an old partner that they've been working with to establish a domestically owned enterprise on their behalf. This is naturally to their own risk. Why? Because the foreign investor is silently funding the individual, who in turn is funding the newly opened domestically owned enterprise. Generally, these companies don't sign contracts. They don't have any proof of the relationship that is occurring besides a bank transfer. It is important, if you are doing this type of business model, to make sure that you are covered and you are safe. You want to make sure that you can exit this type of relationship and ultimately get your money back. So it's not a solution I necessarily recommend, but if it is a decision that the foreign investor wants to take, make sure you meet with a lawyer to have contracts drafted to show proof of money flow, cash flow, and what ultimately that entity is doing on your behalf. Joint ventures. Now, a joint venture in China is a type of foreign investment enterprise. It is a formal and legal entity that shows the relationship and partnership between a foreign and Chinese investors who together share the profits, losses, and management of production. Foreign investors, there are two major reasons why you would probably take the route of establishing a joint venture. The first would be when entering a certain industry, that industry is prohibited or restricted according to the negative list. And as such, you require the assistance of a local partner to help you enter this sector within the Chinese market. The other reason is that the local partner may offer tangible benefits to you, such as a well-established distribution channel, which may take you years to establish. You want to bypass the time utilizing network to be able to enter the market. Government relationships, or obviously significant to the local market that always takes time to build. As with any partnership, and the advantages of working together, they also face serious challenges. And as you all know, there are immense amounts of divorces in China. It's strongly recommended that prior to choosing this form of investment vehicle, that you meet and consult with an individual that has either worked in a joint venture or helped establish a joint venture that can share their war stories. But not only their war stories, also the pros of the relationship. But in order to be able to talk to people, to understand what the dilemmas, challenges, the good sides that can occur with the joint venture. And it's also important to talk with a lawyer. The lawyers are there to help you protect yourself, to make sure that precautions are implemented, exit strategies are carefully planned, protective measures are being taken, that the investment, the financial investment, potentially even the emotional investment that's going developing this joint venture is safe and protected. Now, the last type of partnerships, and generally, foreign invested partnerships are associated with law firms and accountants in China. But the partnership provides structurally more flexibility than a joint venture. There are two forms of partnerships. The first is a general partnership, which partners undertake unlimited liability to set up the partnership. And the second is limited partnerships, one general partner and one or more limited partners. Limited partners generally participate in the daily management, the day-to-day functions of the entity, and are more liable for the debts of the partnership, but only to the extent of the capital contribution that they make into the partnership. Now, we have reviewed the legal entities, the types of legal entities that exist in the Chinese market. Now, a representative office may be suitable for businesses looking to establish a short-term presence in China with no need to generate revenue and very limited resources available to them. However, a representative office should not be simply a way for new market entrants to China to minimize their exposure in the event of failure, because in most cases, representative offices don't provide the optimum platform for success in any case. Now, in the next section, we're going to be looking at how to develop your structural plan for your China company. What do you need to know, or what do you need to do in order to be able to file the application to register your chosen type of entity? And we're going to do this by looking and comparing between a representative office and a limited liability. And we'll be going through the 10 points that are listed on the slide. Liability, stability, so office address, the name of the Chinese company, the capital needed to make the investment, choosing the right individual organization, and looking at the human resource and ongoing operational costs and side of things. So let's begin. Let's look at the liability aspect. A representative office is a non-legal entity. It's an independent entity. It is not an independent entity. It is an extension of the parent company. And as such, the parent company and the appointed chief representative, which I'll explain what that is on the next slide, they take responsibility and liability for its operations. On the other side of things, a limited liability company provides greater protection because it is a form of limited liability. Now, one key aspect to remember is that it doesn't offer the same level of protection as other jurisdictions, so don't put your expectations too high. But because of this, what many foreign companies do is they insert an offshore holding company between the Chinese company and the ultimate beneficiary to protect themselves. But ultimately, in terms of liability, the limited liability company has greater flexibility than a representative office. Flexibility. Now, there are two key aspects for me which are critical for flexibility. One is the business scope, and one is expansion. In terms of business scope, as I mentioned earlier, representative offices have fixed business scope. Liaison is really the only function and activity that they can do. When you're looking at a limited liability company, you can start off as a consulting company. You can then add to your business scope so you become a trading company. You can add into your business scope so that it eventually becomes a manufacturing company. You have flexibility to add onto your business scope. Now, you wouldn't delete from your business scope. That has no advantage to you, but you want to make sure that your business scope is as large and as vague and as concrete as possible to highlight both your short-term objectives, long-term objectives in terms of what you want for business. Expansion is critical. Representative office, this is a non-legal entity set up by the parent company in one city in China. This representative office cannot expand. The parent company can expand, but the representative office cannot. Which basically means if you have this type of structure, all that you can do is set up additional representative offices in other locations that potentially might not have the same name of the company, and as a consequence, there's cohesiveness with a structure. A limited liability company allows you to establish branch offices throughout China, and it allows this opportunity to expand the same company name and with a cohesiveness most people like to see in their structure. Marketability for me is a critical one, and it's something that I feel most market entrants overlook. And it definitely does become a significant barrier to business development. Most customers, most clients, they perceive that a limited liability company has a more substantial market presence than a representative office does. It basically shows to the market that you have a long-term commitment to China. And you are there because you want to develop the market, you want to grow, and you're going to stay. A representative office shows short-term presence, research. If the market research is unsuccessful, that you're going to be exiting the market. So this is really critical to understand in terms of your marketability in the market. Now the next topic is business scope. As I mentioned earlier, business scope for me, it actually dictates the type of entity that you will establish. If you only want to do representative offices for you. If you want to do trading, you need a plan. What I recommend to a lot of clients, before they come even to their first meeting with me, is to list out on a piece of paper short-term objectives and long-term objectives, and in bullet point form, what activities do you want to perform underneath that entity. This will give me an idea of what entity can them both and long-term in order to reduce administrative measures in the long-term development of the company. Now, it's very important to understand that anything that is written in your business scope, you are permitted to do. There are no restrictions. Anything that is not written in your business scope, it is illegal to perform in the Chinese market. And if at the year end, auditors see transactions that are not matching with your business scope, will be raised. And ultimately, it may cost you time and money to then convert your business scope. And you may feel also rushed in order to be doing them. Now, why do I say do your short-term activities or long-term activities? It's because most people, when they come to me, they want a solution, which in most people's eyes is representative. You don't see it in that way, but that's how they perceive it. And when I ask them, what are your long-term objectives? Are you planning on generating revenue in the local market? How are you going to generate revenue? What activities are you going to be forming? That basically implies that you are going to become operational. And rather than go establishing a rep office, closing down the rep office, that's a brand new limited liability, you may as well go straight into the structure of a limited liability company. So here's still a critical point that needs to be discussed at length with every single company to really understand short-term objectives, long-term objectives, and both of what activities are going to be handled within that entity. And ultimately, are you going to be generating, not revenue generating? That will always dictate what you're going to be doing. The next is registered office address, which again is extremely critical. Why? Because virtual offices in China are legal. Virtual offices are actually permitted in many other jurisdictions, but in China, it is not permitted. In China, your registered office address must be a real office space with 4 walls. It can be in a business center. It can be in a commercial space. But according to your business scope and according to the entity, your registered office address has to match. Meaning, if you're a manufacturing company, you need a factory space. If you're planning on doing any form of retail activity, you need to have a retail shop. If you're trading or your representative office, at a minimum, you need to be in a commercial space. Residential spaces are not permitted in China for the registration process. Your office addresses can cause long-term tax and legal obstacles and issues. Our next webinar session will be on a detailed analysis of what to think about for your registered office address. Please do join us on that webinar and on that recording. But don't take this so lightly. Don't rush into signing lease agreements. Take your time to understand in which city do you want to be in which district city do you want to be in, and really understand the short and long-term benefits of choosing that location. The next is choosing your company name. And for me, again, this is another critical point that you need to consider. Now, in the case of Woodburn Accountants and Advisors, we market ourselves with our company name. We have a Chinese company name because we're required by law to register our name in Chinese. But for marketing purposes, we use our English name. Now, most companies, when they go on the Chinese market, they will want to have a Chinese name that they utilize for marketing purposes. They will want that name to also be trade, and hopefully they will want that name to be the name for the registration of the company. All these 3 things are extremely different. Trademark is with the Trademark Bureau, registration of the company is with the COC, et cetera, et cetera. So you've really got to make sure you find a unique name that can be registered everywhere, that hasn't been registered yet, etc. For foreign invested companies, I highlighted the format of the names, both for a limited liability company and a representative office. You can't change the formatting. Generally, 2 to 4 characters are chosen, and stay away from political names, stay away from countries, stay away from numerical figures, etc. Total investment in registered capital, again, is very important. I think one thing to highlight here is that there are no minimum capital requirements, which obviously includes people to create a budget and a cash flow analysis. Now, the COC requires 2 numbers. They require the total investment and the registered capital amount. It is important for each company to calculate their projected budget and cash flow needs. You should invest sufficient funds to sustain the company so you can expect it to be cash flow positive. Too many investors spend too much time finding ways to minimize their capital investments, only to find out that business expenses are greater than anticipated. Operating in China is not cheap. Office rent, remuneration of experienced employees rival that of any developed country, especially in cities like Shanghai. It is important to keep in mind that if funds are transferred to the limited company more than the registered capital, treated as income subject to tax. Now, a representative office has no registered capital requirement and instead generally taxes on its expenses, approximately 10% on its expenses. There is a strict calculation and formula which we applied in order to pay the taxes of the RO. The reason a representative office pays taxes is because it indirectly contributes to the potential of the parent company. And if the Chinese tax authorities decide that a RO is generating revenue from outside its intended activities and levy tax on its deemed revenue, a limited liability company, on the other hand, is required to make an initial capitalization, which is tax-free, but it is expected to pay taxes on its revenues and profits. And if a Chinese limited liability company expenditures exceed a threshold, it in fact be more tax efficient establishing the law. So there are tax components that need to be considered in all of this as well. The next point is looking at the corporate structure of your company in China. Who are you going to choose as the individuals to represent your organization in China? So let's go through each point. The shareholder of the China company is the investor. This company must be decided upon prior to the establishment of the company. A series of documents associated with the shareholder must be notarized by the Chinese embassy or China designated notary. On the other side, the shareholder or parent company of representative office must be at least 2 years old before it is eligible to establish itself in China. The general trend is that the Chinese government is discouraging the use of representative offices, and different locations may place additional restrictions upon the parent company before the representative office to file the application. The authorized signing authority on behalf of the shareholder is basically an individual within the board of directors of the shareholder to sign all of the documents during the application phase. This person's signature is registered at the government offices, and if the unit changes and the document signed by him, it always has to be the same person. So that is filed and secured, and the individual must be chosen accordingly. In a limited liability structure, the shareholder will appoint a board of directors, which is made up of a minimum of 3 individuals, or an executive director, which is made up of 1 individual. The role of the board of directors, or executive director, is to create the goals, objectives, and strategies of the China company. This is not created within a representative office structure. The shareholder will appoint a legal representative, who is by default the chairman of the board or executive director. The definition is of a natural person who oversees the legal affairs of the China company and acts on behalf of the company. This person will be the authorized signatory of the China company, and the signature will be recorded within the various government offices. For a representative office, is called chief representative, which I mentioned earlier in the rep office slides, and the definition is identical to the legal representative. The board of directors or executive director will appoint the general manager who handles the day-to-day management of the company. The GM is required to fulfill the objectives forth by the board or executive director. In a representative, the general manager is by default the chief representative, and there's no appointment letter which needs to be signed to indicate who the general manager is. The appointment actually for the chief representative. Will appoint the supervisor of the company. The main role of the supervisor is to safeguard and supervise the operation of the company and the work of the directors and senior managers. Supervisors have wide-ranging powers in the company's finances, to recommending dismissal of directors and senior managers who may be violating the law of the company. This position is not applicable within a representative office structure. In terms of the quantity of individuals that actually have to be appointed within the China structure, limited liability companies are more complicated than representative offices. But on the other side, you have more individuals that have certain liabilities, and not everything falls on one individual that is appointed like in a representative office. The last 2 points are looking at the human resources and the ongoing operational costs. A representative office is not permitted to hire mainland Chinese staff directly, but must use a licensed labor dispatch agent. The representative office is limited to no more than 4 foreign employees. And on the other side, a limited liability company can hire as many mainland Chinese individuals as it likes. It can hire also as many foreign individuals as it likes. Usually this is dependent upon the registered capital being invested, but it's also dependent upon the roles that are allocated to foreign individuals. Questions nowadays are, can these roles not be fulfilled by mainland Chinese staff? Why must they be fulfilled by foreign employees? The ongoing operational costs, a representative office has fewer compared to a limited liability company, particularly in respect to accounting and tax compliance. However, depending upon the length of operations and the size of the annual expenditure, a limited liability company can be significantly less expensive to operate due to the lower effective tax rate and a 5-year carry forward on loss. So do keep that in mind. So now we've reviewed the types of entities. Now we've also reviewed the top 10 structural issues that one has to analyze in order to create their company in China. Once this is done, it's time to register the company. Now, once the structural plan is outlined, you have everything defined, you submit. China is old-fashioned for the documentation. Be prepared to receive a package filled with paper that will be at a minimum in English and Chinese, the third language, depending on where you are residing. Important and key point is that all documents must be signed with a black ink pen, not a green, not a blue, not a red pen, but a black ink pen, not a ballpoint pen, an ink pen. So very critical issues that need to be kept in mind. If you don't follow this, it can increase the amount of time it takes to register your company. Now, the process for establishing your China company is relatively straightforward. As I mentioned, it does take about 3 to 6 months to complete the entire 9-step process. Might be a little bit shorter if you're a consulting company. Might be a little bit longer if you're a manufacturing company because you'll have more steps that need to be applied for. The 9 steps here are the general step-by-step procedure. In some cities, they may vary, but in the majority of cases, it is this flow that you can. You have to go through the name approval. If you are manufacturing, you need to obtain the environmental license application. Do an online registration. You'll also do an approval process. And finally, your business license will be issued, which indicates that you are finally operational. You will need to file and carve the chops and seals, file an application with the District Tax Bureau, open your bank account, and last but not least, file a customs registration application if you are trading in goods. And so this is for any type of site or manufacturing facility. Now, the main document to be submitted to the Chinese authorities is an online application form where key information on the investors and the general structure of the Chinese company are needed and need to be provided. On a side note, it is important to be aware that institutional documents, such as articles of association and joint venture contracts, they're no longer subject to review, but they still must be submitted and are important documents in the long term. In addition, notarized shareholder documents must be provided, either notarized by a Chinese consulate or a China designated notary in the case of Hong Kong and Macau. A bank reference letter will also need to be submitted, showing that the investment capital is readily available. Appointment letters would have to be drafted, indicating who's going to be appointed within the structure of the China company. And finally, our last slide, looking at the conclusion and tips of today's presentation. Obtain pre-investment advisory. Meet with a corporate service provider or a lawyer to understand what are your short and long-term objectives and what type of company will suit your needs. Have your provider help you develop the 10 points of the corporate structure in order to make sure that you're doing everything correct. Ultimately, like every company, you are looking to reduce administrative costs. And in order to be able to reduce your administrative costs in the long term, you want to make sure you have the right structure from day one and not fix things down the line. I hope today's presentation has been useful to you. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. My contact information is listed here, or go to woodburnglobal.com to reach out to us. Last but not least, if you're interested in receiving our latest legal, tax, and trade news on Hong Kong and China, you can subscribe free of charge at our website at woodburnglobal.com. Alternatively, follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter and see what's happening on a daily basis. I look forward to seeing you all again soon for our next presentation, and I wish you a very pleasant evening. Thank you, and goodbye.